Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for today's webinar. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. I'm lucky enough to be speaking to you today from Taungurung country. Let us know in the chat which land you're on today. My name is Nell Thompson and I'm the Secretary of the Australian Institute of Animal Management, and I'll be hosting the webinar for you today. I've been on the AIM committee since 2013 and I'm also the coordinator of the National Getting to Zero program. The Australian Institute of Animal Management, or as we call it AIM, is the national peak body representing local government animal management officers. The AIM committee consists of a wide range of professionals engaged in the various aspects of animal management. AIM seeks to support those engaged in the business of animal management and the function itself by providing training and information, opportunities for networking and collaboration, and by encouraging the use of best practice policy and practices. AIM understands the significant pressures placed on local government and related sector service providers when working in the companion animal management space. We welcome new members and people can join via our website at www.aim.org.au. So what is happening today? Well, there will be around 50 minutes of presentation and around 10 minutes of question time once the presentation is concluded. The recording of this webinar will be accessible via our website to all members to watch at any time. We're going to ask that everyone mutes themselves during the presentation, and if you have questions, you can start putting them in the Q&A section and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the session. If you have quick questions that relate to your understanding of the content, put your hand up. There's a button down the bottom of your screen, and we're happy to answer those questions during the presentation. If you have more questions or we don't get to yours during the question time, you can send a message to our Facebook page and we'll get to it that way, or email us. I'm excited to welcome Lesley Humphries as our presenter today, and I do believe that she is joined by Jamie Love, and I'll let her introduce Jamie. But Lesley has been preparing strategic and operational service plans and policy for over 20 years and across a diverse range of local government portfolios. This includes the planning of animal management services and policy, specifically relating to dogs in public places. Lesley has experienced firsthand the service credibility and resourcing benefits that can eventuate from having a service plan that is based on sound planning principles and uses evidence-based research. So let's get started. Over to you, Lesley.
Many thanks, Nell, and welcome everybody. Now this will be good. Good start. Go. The first thing I want to do is just clarify what we mean by a strategic plan, which is the definition that's given to animal management plans. It's a very high-level document within organisations, and it sets the parameters and the scope, defines the scope, and defines the vision that a service has and wishes to communicate. So it is a very high-level document. It doesn't get down into the detail. There will be recommendations that might fall out of that document that does recommend that greater detail be explored on various topics, but it doesn't make recommendations on those itself. And we'll talk about the reasons for not doing that. It sets the picture. It communicates what the service is about. It tries to connect viscerally with its audience. And of course, in this case, that's our decision makers, that's other people in the organisation, other departments, and importantly, our community. So it communicates those big picture elements and establishes, importantly, the principles that will guide the service. And I'll just make a point at this stage that if you go and have a look at your animal management plan, if you've got one, and have a look at those that other LGAs have put together, and just have a look if they've really established something that is a vision that is going to connect with the audience. So connect with the internal stakeholders, connect with our community. And I'm finding that with a lot of the animal management plans, that's missing, as are the guiding principles that by which the service will operate. And that essentially communicates the message or the passion, the energy or the professionalism that that's going to underpin the service. So really critical to have those up front. In Victoria, of course, their domestic animal management plans, South Australia, companion animal management plans, and some others of you may also have them, even though you're not required by state government legislation. They may be called a business plan. Generally, they're referred to as strategic plans. Now, I just pop up under there. This is an organisation. This came out of an animal management plan. And it very much set the high level objective of the service. And it's tight, it uses tight language, but it uses very, very well chosen words to try and communicate where that service wants to be, where it is pitching itself. So it's emphasised the importance of pets. It talks about the humane treatment of pets. It talks about the harmony that must exist between pets and other members of our community, human members of our community in particular, and the environment. So it addresses some of the key concerns that other departments within the organisation may have. So we're saying it right up front. We get that we don't operate in isolation, and we understand some of the talk or the speak of strategic planning. I just want to give you a little bit of the data that came out of the survey that many of you were good enough to complete for us. And I'll try and remember to throw these up again later in the presentation, because it may just trigger some thinking in terms of what we're missing out on in terms of trying to leverage the profile, leverage the professional status, leveraging the understanding of our service within the organisation. So around 60% of respondents said that they write their own animal management plan in-house, which is perfectly fine. The concerns that we might have in terms of the responses that came through in relation to that is that 40% of respondents said that the content is very much like the previous document. 40% only said that they've used their animal management plan as an effective tool to get additional resources. And 30% said that it was pretty much a tick the box exercise. So if that's the case, just think about whether we're really using our domestic animal or our animal management plan to gain some of the objectives or status or credibility or increase status so we can attract additional resources. Are we using that process effectively? Just as a note, around 80% of respondents said they don't actually discuss other wider societal issues around pets. Now, I know there will be many of you who will say, well, we just don't have the resources to even be able to consider those things. And that's not an expectation of our council. But as professionals in this field, we need to ask the question, what responsibility should we have in bringing these matters to the table, whether or not animal management services takes the lead in dealing with them or not? That some of these things are falling through the net. And we'll talk later about the role of other service departments in some of the issues that you discover, find out about, research about as part of your animal management process. 83% of you said that the document's not very innovative or doesn't introduce very innovative practices or ideas or initiatives. 89, and this is the concerning point, 89% of you said that your document is not seen as an organisation-wide document. In other words, it's seen as an animal management plan that stays within animal management services and is not integrated as other strategic plans are within the organisation. And 74% have said that you haven't used it to secure additional resources from council. And just very briefly, there were 14 who said they didn't have one, and 7 of those respondents said that their service is actually functioning well without one. So the challenge to those organisations, I'd like you to have a think about what you might be missing out on by not having a document that is seen as it's adopted and accepted as a high-level strategic management plan within your organisation. Okay, and I won't hover too much on these, and you'll get a copy of the presentation, but it's interesting that 74% of you said that your service has a fairly high profile within the organisation. What I'd like you to do, if you did answer yes to that, is have a think about whether that's in relation to your compliance services, your compliance role and dealing with the problems of the service, or is it also in relation to your breadth of understanding about how your service might impact on other services and indeed other services on yours? It was half and half in terms of you feeling that your challenges of your service were understood by the organisation. 44% of you saying you're not well resourced. You can see the split there between the respondents in terms of those who have a separate animal management team and those who don't. And Jamie, who I haven't introduced yet, will talk to you about their transition. You're dealing with increased rudeness and challenges coming from the community, and I'm wondering if that conversation is being had in your animal management plans, because it is a real resourcing issue. It's certainly an issue in relation to the care of our staff and support of our staff. Legal matters are taking up a lot more of your time than they have. 62% of you said you're invited to other departmental planning processes, which is great. But the concern is whether you are also inviting a breadth of service areas to your planning process. And we'll talk about the downsides of that if you're not. Okay. So if we don't have one, at very high level, if we don't have one, we've got ad hoc decision making going on. So it's basically left to individuals or separate departments to assume what might be the case and to act accordingly. We find when we don't have that strategic plan that we're working day to day, we're surviving the day to day, and we're working what a business would call, we're working in the business and we're not working on the business at any stage. We're missing out on service credibility and status. And certainly in terms of knowledge that might come our way and that we share with other departments is not occurring. And there can be very false misconceptions or perceptions about what the service is on about. So if some of you are feeling challenged because you're feeling that you're doing the hard work out there in dealing with the problems and dealing with the challenges of those problems, and that is your role, and that is all your role is, then that's what can happen when we don't have that strategic plan and inform what the bigger picture might be about. And you'll get left out of the loop. You'll get left out of that conversation loop because the perceptions are that this is your role, when indeed it's far greater. And importantly, and this is really critical, you're missing an opportunity to leverage your service, knowledge of your service in terms of what it's lacking, as well as what it's achieving, and particularly in terms of credibility, in terms of passion. the communication of passion about your service, just as youth services are passionate about their demographic, age services similarly. Do you get the chance to express that, or are most of your conversations around the problems? And certainly in terms of communicating what is good practice, and you may not be aware of that yourself if you're not engaging in that strategic planning process. In terms of playing the same game or playing in the same field as the other departments are, and you'll have heard of recreation strategies, open space strategies, youth strategies, family and children services strategies. All these service areas all have these high level documents, and if you're not in that realm, then you're not even competing in the same level of discussion. So it's really important that you understand the language of leverage. And there is common language that's used for strategic planning across most departments within council. And you will have heard them. You will have heard of things like universal design, which is about designing and optimizing opportunities for the greatest number in our community. You will have heard about accessibility, which means financial accessibility. It means physical accessibility. So it's really about understanding the common language that's used. I can't stress enough about getting involved. Now, some of you clearly have said that you're included by other departments in the planning of their policy and their strategic plans. And if you're not, then you need to make yourselves known about the scope of your service and other services that will impact, or decisions that are made in other services that will impact on your service. And equally, knowledge that you have about your demographic, which are pet owners and pets. So you're an advocate for two very different demographics, if you like, or cohorts that you have a role in advocating for, but also in terms of dealing with the issues associated with that service, which are far more complex than many other services. And I'd just really like to say at this point that it's changing the speak within the organisations here too, that if there is a perception in your organisation that you are the department, the unit that goes and deals with the challenging and awful problems that are occurring out there. If you're part of an integrated service management team, it'll be about parking and dumped cars and so forth, as well as issues around animals. But it's really important that we flip the language a little, such that we're saying we value our demographics, we value the animals that are part of our service, we value the pet owners. And it's slightly shifting that sentiment from the past, which was about dealing with problems because they're a problem, and saying we value them and what they bring. And if you want to paint that picture, let's think about the therapy dogs. Let's think about the health and well-being benefits that we know research has told us about pet ownership and what pets bring to us. Let's look at the animals that go to court with children and support children in those environments. So we are working with a really beautiful cross-section of the community, and we need to communicate the value of that. So get involved. I've touched on the vision and the guiding principles. The guiding principles I'll come back to in the last slide, and I'll give you an example of an organisation that's really articulated what they stand for, or what their service stands for, and what they as professionals stand for. I can't emphasise enough about evidence-based research. Again, if you want to leverage your document and your service, you need to let the organisation know that there is incredible research out there and that you know what that research is about and how it applies to your service. So you are seen as an expert in your field right across the breadth of your service, of your field. Actually, it's a difference because your service might be narrow in scope because you've got limited resources, but your field may be a lot wider than that. Be really insightful with your data. Don't keep churning out the same data that can be a bit doubtful because there's mixed opinion in terms of the validity of it. But be really insightful, be really pointed with it. And I'll give you an example of this. We talk about the level of pet ownership in our community, but there was a document that came out just post-COVID that had data that just hit the nail on the head in terms of the issues that animal management services are now dealing with. And that was around in excess of 30% of people who acquired a dog during COVID, they were first-time dog owners. So not only were we not able to get our new pups and dogs to classes because of COVID, we've also got these people who are adopting dogs who have no idea of the complexity of dog ownership. Let's try going forward. Okay. Look, the point in that next bracket there, I won't go through all of them, but I will say when you're writing your domestic animal management plan, I could imagine that some of you by now are saying, yes, you know, we aren't well enough resourced to look at the wider. Remember that council doesn't have to be the sole player in delivering your recommendations, in delivering your implementation plan. That if you go and look at recreation strategies, open space strategies, you will see that there are other departments that are expected to play a role, or there are community agencies that will play a role. But not only that, council might play one of a number of roles. They might deliver part of the service, but they might be an information conduit only for another part of the service, or they might play an advocacy role for another component of the service. You don't have to see that you are doing everything or have to do everything. Okay. Now, just very briefly in terms of a service review. Now, some organisations might do this as part of their strategic plan, but equally a recommendation might come out of your animal management plan to do a thorough service review. Now, there are many services that are not aware of their cost centres, what the various components of their service are costing them. So they can't easily go and advocate for additional resources or funding because they can't break down the service or define the costs associated with the service enough. That service review should also ask questions around how are we perceived? Are we seen as a modern day service? Are we changing in line with different community expectations? And indeed, how do we manage those? Okay, at this stage, I'm going to introduce Jamie. Jamie's the coordinator of animal management services at Melton Council. And they've been through a few changes over the last few years in terms of their structure, but also in terms of how they've approached their animal management plan. So I'm just going to introduce Jamie to you. I think he's got his mugshot up there. Have you got your camera on, Jamie? Jamie, or are you hiding?
Can you hear me, Lesley? Is that okay?
I can now. So I'll let you fire away, Jamie, with what prompted the change in your structure, knowing that you went from an integrated service delivery model to a defined animal management service team model. So if you can give us a rundown on what prompted that change would be great.
Yes, certainly. And thank you for the welcome and the opportunity to speak to our dam plan. So what prompted the change? Animal management was only being carried out as a task at council, the same as an unsightly property or abandoned vehicle would be addressed. So quickly get in, assess the job and close it as best we could. That was clearly identified. This wasn't adequate or in the best interests of the community or council, and customer satisfaction was not being met. And we knew this by the level of complaints and the number of complaints that we were receiving around the animal complaints we're receiving. Basically, we were a council that just ticked the box when it came to its dam plan to maintain legislative compliance. At best, our figures were rounded to paint that good picture and to keep everything in check. We had some very challenging relationships with some interest groups, and we also tried to keep them at arm's length, and that was through a defensive stance that we took, and that was out of a fear of unrealistic expectations they may have had of council, and that we may not have had the answers that they wanted, and we might not have had the answers at all. So it was a really negative space in that field.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jamie. And how easy was it to achieve that transition?
Yeah, so we're quite fortunate. So we had a new manager join the organisation, and they had experience under both the local law model of an officer doing many jobs and many fields, and also the animal management specific team models. So we were lucky in that regard. And with that knowledge to support us, we were able to present the efficiencies that could create great benefits in terms of community satisfaction and service responsiveness, with risks also highlighted with the current operation and level of complaints received. With the damp, I can't stress enough the benefits of having a business case and including in what you touched on earlier, the budgeting, knowing your cost centres, also your resources required to deliver the service, and also have your projections of work and performance outcomes. The risks such as community safety were addressed, poor data quality from council, address the high number of impounds, the less reuniting of animals with their owners, certainly underprepared investigations that were being rushed through and not getting the attention they should have received. And all these risks were presented to council with the intent of going alone as a specific unit.
Beautiful. And the benefits?
The benefits, so, well, we achieved a consistent level of enforcement and approach within the team, having just that job to do. We certainly improved credibility within the community and communicated a level of professionalism that wasn't received prior. We know that because complaints are reduced, and we also investigated each complaint through to a resolution, not simply closing it off as quickly and as best we could. Other benefits, sharing of knowledge between other councils with specific animal teams, basically talking the talk. So we're all in the same space. It was quite easy and positive sharing information and benchmarking what we did with other councils. In-house level, it brought the team together and strengthened our focus of the service. Again, moving back to having that one specific job and not worrying about all other local law tasks. And as I said, just touched on it a little bit earlier, a significant reduction in complaints, which I'm happy to say is ongoing, quite positive.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, next I'd just like to give you a little snapshot of an overview of the learnings really from some of our colleagues and how they've transitioned over time to more mature or integrated services. So just in the past, just an example here of the focus, and we're probably going back, 20, 30 years, but the focus of the operations from various departments was really quite narrow. And a field that I've been involved in for many years, that really our conversations were around sport. And at best, it would have been around football, tennis, cricket, netball. And you can see from the others that there was very, very clear sort of functional operational process. So most of those service areas have transitioned into quite sophisticated business models, if they like, because they've broken down their service. They've come over time to really understand that it's not a one size fits all. There's some very complex and interesting components to their service. And for example, recreation and leisure, that we came to very clearly understand that a sport only catered for a very small component of our community. And in fact, most people engage in physical activity through leisure, not organised sporting clubs and organisations. So not only did we understand that there was structured sport being played and there were unstructured recreation activities, but now we're also understanding that these activities are played in a social context, and again, very informal and very casual. So open space and conservation, they've broken away from that model where we used to think, right, well, open space was all about the football field or the tennis courts. Now we very much understand that open space is used very differently. Therefore, we have different policies and approaches for developing those and for planning those. And conservation has become a big operation in itself. Now, health and wellbeing is a really interesting one because their model it talks about the environments for health. And they look at built and physical, social, economic, and natural environments for health. Now, while you think that mightn't be applicable to you, think about again your demographic and your service, that your service has very specific implications on a social level. We touched on the health and wellbeing benefits of pets. We talk about the community connection and community strengthening benefits that come out of pets. We know that because there's the research there, the evidence-based research there. Economic, well, I don't have to tell you about the economic impacts of pets, but let's talk about the economic benefits that come from that. Let's look at the business side of it. Let's look at tourism and how over 50%, nearly 60% of pet owners, particularly dog owners, are now making holiday decisions and recreation decisions based on them being able to take their dog with them. Now, that has implications for you, particularly if you work in beachside municipalities, because you have the influx of owners with their dogs, which is another challenge in itself. But if you can communicate this information, the benefits as well as the challenges, then we start getting our decision makers seeing the bigger picture. So what was it that helped them make this shift? And it was the things that we've started touching on in this discussion, that saying, what is our service? What does it mean? What is the vision we have for this? What does it touch on? So we define the service more specifically. We look for the positive attributes as well as the challenges. So we try and balance that up. We very much are about valuing our demographic, as I touched on before, evidence-based research, importantly, telling the story as it is. Now, we have a challenge in this sector where there is an element that believe by disguising some of the information, particularly around matters relating to animal surrender or indeed overpopulation of cats or euthanizing of cats, that we're showing ourselves in a better light than may be the case. But the problem with that is that we're not saying to our decision makers, this is a real problem, and as a sector, we need to deal with this differently, or we need additional resourcing. Now, Jamie will touch on the benefit of that approach when we talk a little bit later in terms of his relationships with community. And they elevated their strategic plans to that level. They started playing in a very different game in terms of the strategic planning and communication around their their documents. Now, in terms of leveraging in the community, I can't emphasize enough, and Jamie touched on it before when he said that there were some challenging groups in the community that they kept at arm's length. What we say is bring your foes or your challenges closer to you, because you can deal with that. Otherwise, there's the undermining that can go on in the community. So have those conversations. Don't be fearful of them, but get the help in having the conversations if you need to. I can't emphasize listening and hearing. Listening and hearing. We can, when we're defensive, go into an early justification of our position. And so we're not taking on board. You must, in that early stage of engaging with community, just listen and take it on board. Putting the scope around the service and making decisions about what you will do and won't do, that will come later. But community needs to feel heard. Recognise that there's the noisy majority, and I can't give you a better example than that, than the call from community for fenced off leash areas. And what is happening is that many LGAs don't understand that the use of fenced off leash areas is nowhere near as great as they are as perceived. And those people who do use them or have used them have tended not to continue to use them for various reasons, very, very justifiable reasons. So, and we find that the people that are calling out for those are those that can't control their dogs or won't control their dogs in line with the regulations, and are asking council to control their dogs for them. So it's a bit of an ironic discussion. And just be well armed with the research, and that's a really good example of one. Ditching the jargon and being very clear with your language. We have, every service area has its own language or jargon that we can fall into. In animal management services, we talk about effective control of dogs. We talk about responsible pet ownership. But what's happened is over the years, those terms have been grabbed as an effective or as a marketing tool because they're short and snappy. But when we come to have the conversations with our community around what effective control of a dog is, we're leaving ourselves wide open because we haven't defined what that means. So talking in plain English, which sometimes means using more words than less. Community development resourcing is really important, and domestic animal management or animal management plans will or should identify the gaps in terms of your resourcing or ability to carry out that community engagement, community development work ongoing. If you're really struggling with getting some leverage on that, many organisations have a community development department. And this is when you start trying to edge in there and get a bite of those resources. Not quickly done, but start the process. Now, in terms of the animal management plan, really important that you use the process of that to try and get leverage both in the community and within your organisation. So effective consultation or engagement with community is really critical. Taking the community and your organisation actually on a journey with you. So it's about informing. We touched on that earlier, breaking down some of those perceptions about what your service is or isn't. Helping the community to be your advocate. So there's win-wins both ways. And I'll use the example of that in terms of advocacy. I just want to focus on obedience clubs as an example. That we look for partnerships in the community, no matter what service. We should always be looking for partnerships and where we can leverage outcomes and benefits in the community through partnerships. And there'll be numerous that you could take on, but not trying to solve everything at once. Identify some really key ones that can help you address some of your key service priorities. Now, in working with a number of councils, I found that a resource in the community that is losing ground and that perhaps we need to think more about, and I know there are challenges around it, but I'm finding more and more that our dog obedience clubs are being pushed out of our public open space. But I haven't yet seen an animal management plan that's had the discussion around that and helped advocate that community partnership. I haven't seen an animal management plan that's advocated for a group like that. And we need to stand up for those partnerships. Sell with images. Lots of animal management plans have the lovely, cute, fluffy dog, cat pictures. But if you're trying to drive home a message around domestic violence and pets, or around the issues of multiple dogs being taken into community by one person, then be really clever with your images because they talk very strong. One thing I really want you to take on board: avoid making specific or low-level recommendations in your animal management plan. I'll come back to fenced off leash areas or dog parks on that again, that I've seen strategic plans, whether they be recreation strategies, open space strategies, or animal management plans, make a recommendation that council should put in a fenced off leash area. What needs to come before that is a really thorough understanding of the issues and the implications of putting fencing around off-leash areas. So there needs to be an intermediary step where we learn and we inform both organisations and community around that. Jamie, I'm going to swing back to you. And
Thanks.
in terms of leveraging, what you did to leverage your service and profile and so forth through your DAMP process.
Yeah, thanks, Lesley. So we optimised the involvement of all relevant service areas, such as in council recreation, open spaces, our family and children communities, our older adult communities, eco-dev and town planning. We identified early on, and as you spoke to earlier, it wasn't just a document for animal management to implement. As the research identified, there are opportunities and challenges that could best be addressed by other departments. For example, the impact of domestic violence on pets and families. The action plan identified input from other council business units, such as family services, aged care, and young communities. In this case, animal management would play a support role, and these other departments would take the lead. We used the process early on to engage and inform others of the links and the synergies. We educated about the scope of the animal management service, and also we strongly encouraged them to remain involved, otherwise they could face surprise implications as we moved along the process.
Okay. And in terms of perhaps a specific example that you might have in terms of leveraging the in-house relationships and what you got out of it as a service.
Yes, we just had, prior to that, we'd had no dog off leash strategy and policy. There was ad hoc decision making, which you touched on, and that was around our poorly designed and managed fenced off leash areas, or dog parks, as you've called them. There was a lot of uninformed decision making about provisions for dogs and dog owners, and the decisions did not necessarily consider the impact on animal management service resourcing or quality of the provision.
And as a result of the DAMP, Jamie, what happened?
Look, a really positive outcome from there. So we had funding of major strategy and policy. We had integrated planning between council business units. We certainly had a closer relationship with recreation and open space, with the knowledge that to proactively work to retain these relationships and ensure animal management service was certainly involved in other service area planning as well.
Yes, and I just add there that the animal management plan recognised that the open space strategy raised issues around dogs in public places, and the animal management team also talked to some of the difficulty around some of their off-leash sites and difficulty of monitoring those. So out of those two strategies, which supported each other, how much, I think it was over 30,000 that you managed to secure to do that, put that strategy and policy together through your DAMP. Is that right, Jamie?
Yeah, that was correct. Yes.
And in terms of how you managed to leverage some different relationships in the community?
Yep, certainly. So prior to our dam plan, our relationship with, for example, feline interest groups was certainly fractured. And as I spoke to earlier, it was fair to say we did keep our distance, which was just a negative for both organisations. So there was that fear of the unknown. As a result of the engagement through the dam plan and the engagement with these groups, we're able to find not only middle ground, but benefits for both parties. And this included council funding a discounted desexing strategy to the tune of $46,000. And that resulted in high desexing rates along with our over cat population, and also an increase in financial benefits of new registrations to council.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jamie. Look, all I want to touch on here is the point that that I made earlier, that in different sections of the DAMP, and Melton did this, they talked about domestic violence, they talked about town planning issues and the implications for animal management services, but being really clever with the images that you want to evoke. Just take time in pulling those images together. This is the last slide that I alluded to earlier, and this council wanted to really communicate both in-house and to the community what it stood for. So there are key words that I've highlighted through there. We won't read through all of the points. You can read through those later, but it refers to professionalism, their legal responsibility, their passion for the well-being of animals, the need to balance the needs of other people in the community with those of pet owners, the exploration of new initiatives, reference to good practice and social and scientific research, noting that pets are important, owners having a responsibility, noting that some people don't want to interact with animals. And the last point, stating right up front that they recognise some of the issues that they need to address and find resolution on are often challenging and need the goodwill of the community to address and resolve. So it set the sentiment, if you like, for that engagement with community. So Nell, I guess we can throw open for any comments. It's a lot of info. We've really just touched on some of the key elements of effective high-level strategic planning and the benefits that come from it.
It's a lot to go through, isn't it? But I think this presentation, if that doesn't convince people that it's a worthwhile activity, it might be painful, the process for the first time, but after that it gets easier, and clearly the results. I mean, Jamie, I really appreciate your honesty and transparency with sharing all of that with us, because being able to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, is really valuable, I think. So thank you. Are there any questions? I mean, I've got questions. I've always got questions. But if people have questions, please pop them in the Q&A. And if there's something in the chat that I'm not seeing, please someone let me know. I really liked, Lesley, the comparison of the departments, the now and then, because that was a really good, being able to see it all in one place, seeing how things have changed, seeing the expectations of the community now, but also surely those of us working in those roles are getting more satisfaction. Being able to really integrate whichever department it is, or whatever role it is, in with the whole community. That just, I don't know, for me that would bring huge satisfaction, and to be able to see how much they have evolved, and perhaps our sector hasn't evolved quite so much. So that was really powerful, and I appreciate you including that in the presentation.
No, look, thanks. No, and look, I lived through that process, and I can't tell you that when we managed to get our first recreation strategy up, and that then led to funding. It led to state government funding and then federal government funding. So it just laid the groundwork, and it showed that we were working far more professionally than we were in the past. So the benefits were huge, and Jamie's story tells that too.
Yeah, exactly. And your point about the dog obedience clubs, that is a fantastic point to highlight, because this is a resource that we should be embracing as a sector and saying, please, come along, help us do our jobs. But yeah, actually they're physically being pushed out, and these are community run groups, but they have a huge amount of skill and experience to offer the whole community, and specifically for animal management departments. I mean, I always think that if people are going to put in dog off leash areas, then stationing a local trainer, who you can pay for, what, $40-50 an hour, to rotate through the parks at the peak time, so 2 hours a day, something like that, to help people be able to do what needs to be done. Because most people don't know what to do when they get to a dog park. They think you just let your dog off and go and sit down and have a chat. But if there's someone there guiding them and explaining to them what the expectations are, know that your dog at the moment is not behaving appropriately, and here's what you can do about it, that's gold, absolutely gold. And these are resources that we have in the community already.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I see very little reference to these groups or these potential partnerships in animal management plans. And there's an opportunity to, again, integrate the support for those groups, because many councils will have volunteer strategies and volunteer management support and growth strategies. But I don't believe there are many councils that have recognise that their dog obedience clubs are one of those groups. So we need to advocate for those groups. And yeah, it's another integrated planning aspect.
Yeah, agreed. Jamie, if you're still there, I've just got a question for you, if you don't mind.
Yes,
just
go ahead.
checking
No.
if Jamie's still. Yep.
Yep.
What has there been any difference with the going through this process with your team, and the results that and success that you're now reaping? Have there been any changes with your team's culture, or the general kind of vibe, staff satisfaction, anything like that along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as I touched on earlier, our having one specific unit, it's more cohesive. The culture is quite strong. It's a very comfortable and safe space we have our staff operate in to perform their task. It's a hard enough and passionate enough environment to work in without it being hard within the office spaces as well. So the culture is very strong. There's a lot of pride taken in our work. We see a lot of positive results, even for the not so positives around our dog attacks and things. They're investigated fully because that's our specific job now, and we come to an outcome or a standing of or the right outcome, I should say, through the right investigation and the time to be able to do it. which we'd never had previously, when officers were expected, as I said, to worry about an abandoned vehicle, deal with an unsightly property. Oh, and by the way, you have a dog attack and a barking dog complaint.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fantastic. I've got a question from John here. How do you manage after hours calls with the two teams?
Yeah, really good question. So at the moment, we share the on-call responsibility with local laws. So we have a rostering system of 1 in 11. And what happens is, if a local laws officer on the week that they're on come across a dog attack or an investigation, they hold that investigation and run with it. However, it's overseen by our team, and they come back to us for advice and sign off on their investigation.
Does that answer the question for you, John? If you've got anything else, please let us know. All right. And just one more check before we let Lesley and Jamie go. Does anyone have any other questions for them? I know that Lesley's going to provide this presentation as a PDF, which I'll load on the website, and obviously the recording will be up there in a day or so. Lesley, are you able to share yours and or Jamie's contact details?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want us to put it in chat or?
Yes, yep, do that. And yeah, as Diana says in the chat, well done on such great progress, Jamie and Lesley. That's just outstanding and exactly what we need to be seeing in 2024. So I think you're probably going to be getting some queries coming through after the fact. Thank you for that email address there, Jamie. So everybody, Jamie and Lesley's contact details are in the chat. I'm just going to put that through to everyone. Okay, fantastic. All right, well, if there aren't any more questions, we will let everybody go. I know everyone's busy, so stay tuned to our social media pages and e-news for announcements about future webinars in this series. This is going to be the last one for 2024. I can't believe we're in November already, but we will certainly be working on other resources. And if you've got any suggestions for speakers or for topics that you'd like to see us cover next year, please let us know, because we're very open to suggestions. So thank you so much, Jamie and Lesley. That was a really fantastic presentation. Very much enjoyed that, and I appreciate the time it's taken for you guys to put that together and to attend today. So thank you again. Yes, we've got clapping, we've got thanks so much. Take care, everybody, and we will be talking with you again soon.
Thanks,
Thank
Nell.
you.
Bye-bye.